Okay, this is a roundtable or a panel discussion on senior academic leadership, and we're lucky to have two senior academic leaders here. They're leaders outside of IAFOR, but also in different ways leaders within IAFOR. To my right, we have Anne Boddington, who's our Executive Vice President and Provost, and in this role, in a IAFOR role, she oversees the academic programs, research and policies of IAFOR. But she's also held a number of different senior leadership roles in the United Kingdom and been involved in leadership most recently in research excellence and worked internationally in this area. And indeed, that's something, a great skill set that she brings to IAFOR. And is or was an architect, is an architect. I don't know if you ever give up being an architect, but that's certainly something that's informed her leadership over the years, and that ability to work across disciplines as architects must. So you can see her full biography on page 45. And also we are joined by Heitor Alvelos, who's a full professor of design and director of the ID Plus Research Centre at the University of Porto in Portugal. If you were here yesterday, you will have seen him on the panel. He also currently serves as vice president of the European Academy of Design, and has led a number of different national and international projects. So both of the, it's quiet. Okay. I guess we're either quiet and hot, or we'll see as things go on. And both bring an immense experience of working internationally in international leadership, and this is why we wanted to experiment with doing this sort of senior leadership panel, because it sort of crosses over from both the capacity building side, but also to link what we are trying to do as an organization, which is provide leaders or would-be leaders with some of the tools to engage in international leadership. So that's not just within your institutions, but without, and how to bring the things that you've learned from each other, hopefully over the next few days, into action. So the way in which we're going to do this, because we have 50 minutes in total, is I'm going to give both Anne and Heitor up to 10 minutes each to essentially give a short sort of biographical journey to take in what their leadership experience has been up until this point. Then they're going to ask a few questions of each other, and then I hope we're going to have about 20 minutes to open the floor to you for any questions that you might have as relates to senior academic leadership and what that might mean for you and what that might mean in your contexts. Does that sound clear? Okay, so without further ado, I will give over to Anne, who has up to 10 minutes, no more.
Okay. Okay. I'm on mic. Okay, a few things first. Joe said I'm an architect. I'm also, strangely, having done 42 years, I was working out this morning, 42 years in senior academic leadership of one kind or another. And that doesn't mean to say I've been vice chancellor or something like that. I'm talking about leadership in the broadest sense, leading programs, leading faculties, leading schools, leading universities too, and leading national projects. And my training actually as an architect was one of the best things that taught me about that. But I think I'm an accidental academic. So whatever people tell you about planning your career, mine didn't happen in some kind of wonderful global plan. It was very much putting my hand up and saying probably yes too often sometimes being nudged to say yes. From starting my career as a freelance architect and teaching 1-2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week as a sessional lecturer, to putting my hand up and applying for being a senior lecturer, running architectural programs, teaching architecture for about 10 years, and then stepping into what I would call, and what many people probably in this room see as senior leadership, which is becoming a head of school in a university that managed multiple subjects. And one of the things I think that taught me most is moving out of my discipline and having to think about leadership in terms of running. So I moved from architecture to running architecture interiors, fashion and textiles, three-dimensional design, craft. And then after about 6 years, becoming a dean of a faculty, well, executive dean of a faculty in the end, of 5,000 students over 5 sites. And it's suddenly feeling that no longer was I connected to a discipline, as it were, although I still hold dear my discipline very much, but actually moving through and using my discipline in very different ways. And I was very lucky, I think, in my career, which is to have a lot of very good mentors, very good friends, and also colleagues who said, either go for it or don't go for it sometimes. Moving into then I ran a faculty for about nearly 15 years, I think, in total. And that's running all the arts and humanities for a university. And then moving into running research and business for a university. So that's representing the university outside very much, but also managing research audit and research performance. And that was a really, they're big shifts, they're big milestones, those ones, when you move out of your field. So you're no longer running something, you know the answer to all the questions, to leading and actually understanding performance in many different fields, and then understanding the performance of a university. So there's a set of milestones within a university or across universities. I think there are then the roles that you take, and the roles I was encouraged to take, which are roles a little bit like the one I do now in IAFOR, but actually in national subject associations, in professional bodies. Or for me, one of the things I'm very much known for in the UK is I've run, managed and chaired the Research Excellence Framework, which is the national government audit for research for art and design. So I moved from architecture right the way across to being known, and that's why my professorial title is Professor of Design Innovation, right the way across from being an architect and a housing architect, actually, at that. So I was doing very modest housing work, quite complex work, right the way through to then working on a national platform. And those national platforms teach you very different things. They teach you actually how ministers think. They teach you how bureaucracies think, and how you might then respond to those things. And all the way through that, one of the things I'd say about the decisions you make in terms of those milestones is every time you do it, you learn perhaps some of the things you should have learned earlier, and you learn by making mistakes. And I think that quite often in lots of career books and lots of career structures, you learn by making mistakes. One of the things you also learn is how to say, I made a mistake and I'm going to put it right. And one of the things I think that's really important about leadership is being able to live with your error and, better still, do something about it. So it's one of those kind of things about, in a sense, being a grown-up and saying, yeah, I got that wrong and I'm going to put something right. And that's true right the way through the process, that you have to catch problems as they come and you have to then respond to them. And responding to those on a national platform is sometimes pretty tough, but it's actually one of the things that helps you learn how to catch a problem. And the thing that has driven me through, I think, some of those is then if you do that on a national or international platform. So I've worked in Hong Kong and India a lot, I'm still doing, for IAFOR, which works obviously across the world, but also across Europe. In fact, Heitor and I have worked together in a number of situations, and I've supervised in Porto with Heitor and colleagues. So you get to learn how different places and different ways of thinking help that. And it's one of the reasons I'm still involved. I've retired 3 times, believe it or not, still going, busier than ever. But part of that is because I enjoy what I do. But the other thing I'd say, and we may want to come back to this, and we and this panel have talked about it a little bit, is it's also knowing when you reach the level at which you don't want to go any further. And one of the things that was very interesting for me, and this is about crossroads, and you will all meet them at some point. I was on a kind of trajectory which meant everybody thought you'd become a president or a vice chancellor. And I decided at a particular point that that's not what I wanted to do. And that's partly because I'm probably maybe sort of, I have a real problem with hiding my dislikes of some of my beliefs. So Joe and colleagues often call it the kissing the babies moment, but I don't call it that particularly. But it's actually about when you actually feel that if somebody tells me to go and shake hands and I don't believe in something, I don't want to do it. And that meant that integrity for me, in terms of what I believed in and what I advocate for and what I support people to do, was really vital in that role. So that was something that some people would say it stops your career. I think it gave me a different set of choices. And I think one of the things now, and one of the greatest privileges of what I do now, a lot of which is mentorship, supporting others, supporting other institutions, is very much about trying to help those people move through those difficult choices, some of which I got horribly wrong, some of which I think I was just lucky, and some of which I kind of spotted and thought, actually, that's a great opportunity. So I think it's just thinking through those processes of senior leadership and what you want to change, what you want to do, and what gives you best purpose. And what I mean by that, there are certainly things that you really don't like and you go into leadership to change. And there are things that you go into leadership because you enjoy and because that's what gives you the greatest satisfaction at the end of the day. So I'm going to stop there.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got something there around, just to recap, using your discipline in different ways. So that's going outside and above and beyond, or using the discipline to do other things. There's something around there of learning how to respond to things, perhaps rather than react. There's being comfortable with making mistakes and being able to put those right. There's going from obviously department level to maybe institutions, but also working internationally. And there's an idea of what you want to be, what levels at which you wish to exercise leadership. And then there's something key around there to beliefs and integrity as to what shapes your career. Thank you. I think there's a number of things that we can signpost there. Okay, we're going to hand over to Heitor now, who's 10 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Joe. Again, thanks for the opportunity to present and hopefully share some interesting ideas with you. And thanks to Anne for the contextualization, which was actually very useful. I found some common ground here, inevitably. I didn't plan a career either. It just kind of happened. Although I should say I did feel a very strong vocation for teaching. The classroom made sense to me, and it still does after all these years. I think part of my trajectory involved the fact that I engaged quite early in certain kinds of professional challenges that not too many people were taking at the time. The times have changed, of course. I'm talking about 1989, 1990, when I decided to apply for a Fulbright scholarship in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute for my master's degree. Back in 1989, nobody really studied abroad in Portugal, from Portugal. We're talking about pre-internet, all of that. So this was a bit of a leap of faith. Without knowing anyone across the Atlantic, I just decided to, well, apply. I got it, and I packed and went. Maybe a bit of it was too much bravery, but it worked out really well. What it enabled me to do, apart from giving me a broader perspective, cultural perspective, that was, again, and I think a lot less available at the time because there were no online resources back then. It enabled me to improve my English skills. And I would not underestimate this aspect of it, because in many ways, it enabled me to speak with an international community on an equal basis, which is often an issue, as we know. Maybe linguistic issues shouldn't be so much of a problem, and that's also another interesting discussion to be had one day. Multiculturality and the fact that English is still prevalent in research, and maybe we can and should diversify a lot more. But let's leave that for later. I then wanted to do a PhD. And having returned to Portugal, there were no PhD courses, programs in design, so I actually had to go to London for that. And again, I was the first one to get a PhD in design, meaning that I faced a tough dilemma back then. I was invited to coordinate the drawing studio at the Royal College of Art where I was doing the PhD, and I did so for a couple of years. And then I was invited to stay there permanently. And I faced this dilemma, which was possibly professionally the toughest dilemma I ever faced. Do I stay in London and coordinate the drawing studio at the Royal College of Art, which seems quite attractive? Or do I actually go to Portugal and, well, in many ways, with my colleagues, start the tradition and the discipline of design research locally, which didn't exist at the time? This was a huge dilemma for me, and obviously had to do a lot of thinking. And I finally decided I wanted to go to Portugal, which I did, and I'm there until this day, having contributed to the Foundation of Design Research in Portugal, both as a research center, which I co-direct at the moment, and also by opening the first PhD in design program. And going back to Anne's words, I think a lot of this was just pure chance. I just happened to be a bit early. I don't think a lot of these opportunities would be so easy to grasp or to kind of land on your lap with a bit of courage, like I said. Still, it's been very, very rewarding. This sense that I had the good fortune to contribute to the advancement of a discipline locally, and, well, in some ways, from what we hear, actually laying the groundwork for other possibilities for design research and advanced studies in other countries. I would point out briefly some further international experience that I think has been relevant, apart from, of course, contexts such as IAFOR, which I hold in high esteem. For about a decade, the Portuguese government consulted with various US universities on emerging topics, and one of them was digital media. And I was part of the team in charge of coordinating with the University of Texas at Austin for this kind of technological push in Portugal, both in terms of media technology, but also in terms of media culture. I came in, well, from the cultural side. That connection with the US was interesting, And it included some surprises, such as the delegation from UT Austin coming to Porto to visit, us showing them around, and one of the senior leaders saying to us, "I don't really understand why we've been hired. You're doing everything right." So maybe that's why they were hired, for confirmation, because that's often also important, an external validation, as we know. It was a very productive program. It came to an end for various reasons. It's now focusing on other areas. And in the meantime, I've had also, as a connection from this program, I've had the pleasure of being on the scientific board of the Foundation for Science and Technology in Portugal, which is essentially the governmental body that funds research. And I actually I was head of the scientific board for about 5 to 6 years, which gave me the opportunity to coordinate the definition of the strategic agendas for research in Portugal and also contributing to European programs. Apart from that, recently I've been nominated vice president of the European Academy of Design. I would say it's a bit like IAFOR, really, a group of people who are interested in particular kinds of research. Maybe we're a bit more specialized in terms of the design discipline. But apart from that, I think the atmosphere is actually quite similar. There's a friendliness and a warmth that actually and ultimately is what keeps us together. I would add a few things because I see I still have a couple of minutes. Apart from this brief testimony of my trajectory, I would like to go back to Anne's words and again, some common ground that I found here. The issue of mistakes, definitely important, but I would connect this with the notion of humility. Often we think of senior leadership as, positions of power, positions of protocol and diplomacy and, speaking from a higher kind of position. I would argue it's actually the opposite. The more responsibility we have, the more duties we have in terms of institutional and professional agendas, the more humble we have to be, because it gets really complex, both in terms of tasks, but in terms of managing people's subjectivities and making sure that actually you foster and cultivate a good working environment. You cannot build an environment in which people are not happy. It doesn't work. So that's really important, to be humble and understand that, hey, there are other viewpoints, there are other strategies, and actually often it's not so much about dictating what needs to be done, but it's about harmonizing different viewpoints and actually harmonizing the impossible or the seemingly impossible. That's been often my challenge. Finally, because I'm exhausting my time, for now at least, another perspective that I would like to bring is this idea of longer term thinking. I think often as we step into positions of management and leadership, we're very keen on having things happen, and we believe that we can change them for the better quite effectively. Hopefully we can, but we have to keep in mind that often institutions are bigger than us. They will be here after we're gone, and we need to understand that certain changes take patience and persistence, and our contribution might be something like a detail of the overall picture. I think I'll...
Okay, thank you, Heitor. So just to summarize a couple of points there that I thought were interesting is despite both of you being designers, or not despite, because of, but there's not necessarily a plan. There's a lot of life which happens to you, and then it's how you respond to those things that are happening. And I think though that what you displayed there was some form of openness to new experience and to engage, and that those initial sort of steps into what were very prestigious sort of international experience that was initially the risk, but then the risk was, do I stay here and in safety, or do I take a risk again and be engaged in something new, something different, which doesn't have the automatic out the box prestige of something like the RCA. So I think there's an interesting thing here around and lots of people have this in terms of, I want to go here, I want to go to the top places, the best places, but then do I want to stay there? Or what are ways in which I can go back, give back, contribute, and meaningfully lead? So I think that was something I found really interesting. So we're going to, I'm going to only give you 5 minutes each, because I want to leave 20 minutes, if you don't mind. So you can respond to each other. Absolutely.
A few things that came out of Heitor's, which comments, which I thought were really interesting, and things that I've often talked about, and anybody who's heard me talk before. The first was nobody's irreplaceable. We're all replaceable, one way or the other. Might be different, but we are all replaceable. The other thing is it's about humility. Never go into leadership for power. And I think lots and lots of people mistake leadership, management and leadership. Managing other people's programs is rather different from leading. Leading is about enabling other people, and I think said it very well. It's that sense that I have a rule, and it's a rule that I made up, so I'm going to share it, which is what I call 20-20-60 rule, which is about how you manage every time you move into different roles. Because if you kind of think about, whether you're managing a course or a module, whether you're managing a program of study, whether you're managing a school, a faculty, or indeed a university, there are things you have to do. And one of them is a bit like when you get on an aeroplane and they say, please put your mask on before helping others. It's exactly the same in leadership, because leadership, and I see an awful lot of people really suffer because they think they've got to do everything for everybody, read everything. Don't. There's a really, for me, and this is 42 years later, I'd say you've got to be able to do whatever is written on that description in 60% of the time you have available. And you have to take 20% for you, and you have to take 20% for the people that you are enabling also to lead, because you're often not the only leader. There are many leaders. And that sense of, if you like, distributing leadership and caring for the people that you take, that are closest to you, that are the people that you have to enable to lead other things. It's so critical that you take care of yourself, and that you don't go into something and just transfer every form of stress and anxiety to those people. Now, the only thing that's a problem about that, and many people have said this to me, the trouble is with you is you make it look too easy. All I do is don't show it in public, which is not the same thing. So it's what you show in public, and it's what you keep to yourself. But be very, very conscious. You will see it in lots of places, and animals spot it quicker than humans quite often. Relaying stress is one of the things that stresses an organization, and the higher up you are, you have to be really careful. I'm managing a process at the moment, and this is why it made me, your comments, Heitor, was so, that sense of humility is so important. That sense of, when you're managing a national program, and what you say can stress the nation's institutions, you have to be really careful. Say, look, it will be all right. It's the keep calm and carry on, but with a little bit more detail than that, rather than platitudes. But I think it's that kind of sense of the confidence to actually keep people calm knowing that you've got to do something, you've got to produce. I'll stop there.
Very good. Heitor. And thank you, Anne, for your words, which I subscribe to, of course. I would like to point out certain aspects of what you mentioned both a while ago and just now, which I would like to elaborate a bit upon. This idea of reaching the level that you want to reach and not go further is crucial. Of course, the hierarchy is very alluring. And we all have seen, exactly. We all have seen people just go up the ladder because they're supposed to, because they're expected, because they enjoy the status, because of course, the financial rewards. But on the other hand, it's really a kind of an existential question, you know, how far do I want to go and still have a life that I enjoy? I don't know how many of you remember the Peter Principle, which was quite famous, I think, in the 60s. The principle that said that essentially people progressed in their careers up to the point where they became incompetent. But because they had been promoted to that level, they would not be demoted. And that's supposedly why the world is so wrong, because people keep going up until they don't know what they're doing. So with all due adjustments, I think it's important to individually and personally reflect on really where we want to be and actually look at our own skills and do a thorough analysis of what exactly we can provide. A lot of these skills, as Anne pointed out, are actually quite subjective, and they are about having a good environment, and they are about not offloading the stress in a kind of a cascade. Having said this, also brought some memories. So I go back a little bit to the testimonies. What you said, Anne, about the importance of distributing responsibilities. And I completely agree. Of course, nobody's irreplaceable. But one thing that is actually important is for you to ensure that you're training people who might actually replace you in the end. Which is not a duty, but is certainly a good idea to avoid a vacuum in terms of competences. So it's a fine line. What I remember, however, is when I got my PhD back in 2003 and came back to Portugal, I was for a while the only holder of a PhD in design at the University of Porto. And that entailed essentially that I was legally obliged to fulfill certain roles. There was a point in which I was head of the BA studies, head of the MA studies, head of department, head of international relations, and vice president of the school. And actually, I became very, very unpopular, despite the fact that I was very, very keen on having things work. And the reason I think why I became unpopular was because, of course, I was just kind of like protagonizing it too much. Not because I wanted to, but because the law required it. I was very much aware, and of course, very much stressed out every day, very much aware of the kind of trap that I was in. However, I was also aware of the trap, of the fact that the trap was transitory. So as soon as we started getting more PhDs, I started immediately shedding all of these posts that I had been invested with. So yes, by all means, build the bridges, delegate, build a team that is actually based on mutual respect, and it's based on something else, which is fun. My colleague Susanna is out there, and we have a research group together. And the first condition for the group to be successful, and we have been quite successful in bids and all of that, is how our meetings are always a pleasure. We enjoy sitting with each other. And actually, in the lack of hierarchy, so we go back to humility, we're all the same in that room. And we're all providing ideas and complementing each other. There's a common mission that we're very much aware of. And so the fun element I would add to all of it. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Heitor. Thank you, Anne. We have 15 minutes left. I've got hundreds of things that I could ask, but I'm going to open the floor to any questions or comments. Try and keep them punchy for the questions.
Thank you all for an interesting presentation. I'm struck by the fact that you sort of went into your positions by chance. I too had things enter my life by chance. How can we as instructors help prepare our students to take advantages of chances that present themselves?
I can give you a few, which is knowing what a chance looks like, which is those sorts of things. One of the things we were talking before we came up here, one of the things is sometimes other people spot your chances, and sometimes you spot them for yourself. I mean, I had a very good dean who's still a mentor of mine, and he would say to me, just go and do that. And I don't want to do that. He said, go and do it. It's really good for you. And he could see a jump that I couldn't do. But I think the world is a very different place from when I started in that sense. And I think one of the things in terms of instruction is to help people think about their career and some of the things that might now be hygiene, what I would call hygiene factors, that were not hygiene factors for me. I don't have a PhD, but I have chaired more research exercises than most people have in more countries than most people have. And that is because of just a lot of experience, but it's also to do with the time in which I have a professional qualification, and I've learned often the hard way and making a lot of mistakes. But I think now, for example, most places in the world expect people to go on that journey, you know, undergraduate, postgraduate, PhD. What I would then say is, okay, the PhD may have become a hygiene factor. It wasn't when I started 40 odd years ago. But I think what I would then say to you is be careful when you take on a PhD, for example. Most people, when they take it on, there's probably a few of you in this room, the institution will say to you, you've got to be really passionate about the subject you do. Okay, I'd say the opposite. I'd say you've got to be really businesslike about the subject you do. Finish the PhD and get on with the rest of your life and do all the things you're passionate about. I have seen too many people, particularly in my generation and the generations that are very close to mine, I think went into a PhD because they thought they needed to get that hygiene factor or get through that. Life has taken over. So if you don't do a PhD young, you know, and took me 7 years to become an architect. I didn't really want to do another 4 or 5. And then there was no funding. There is now a whole series of things. But I think you've got to be really quite clear as to why you're doing something. Don't do it. I mean, if you do a PhD, be really businesslike about doing a PhD. Finish it. Finish what you start. The other thing I'd say, which I think is true in all cases, start things you can finish.
Mhm.
And actually, nobody will thank you for coming into a leadership position, taking on something, setting a kind of a plan and walking out. You will be blamed forever in that institution, whatever goes right. But the other thing is, it's a bit like, well, did they deliver anything? And now when I interview somebody for a leadership position, I don't actually say, what have you done? I.e., like the list on your CV of how many committees you've been in. I'm not interested. I'm interested in what you made, what difference you made, and what you've produced. And if you haven't done either, you're probably not in the right job, you know, in that sense. I mean, I'm quite a stickler now, but what did you produce? And that it might be a small change in a small place. That's not the issue. The issue is, do you know how to take something from a great idea, you know, a visionary, to deliver it on the ground? And that may be the architect in me, because that's what you have to do. But I think it's actually really, really important. So I think that sense of delivery that we could really help students with is, don't just talk about it, do it.
Heitor, do you have anything to add to that?
Be brief. Thank you for the question. It's an incredibly important one. I believe the first thing that we need to provide the students with is well, a radar, really. Kind of a radar that recognizes the opportunities that can be life-changing. In a sense, metaphorically speaking, an ability to recognize when the stars align. And it is a metaphor, okay? Just making sure. And in that sense, I may also give my testimony. Let's go back a bit to what I was describing when I went to the US. It so happened that the day before the deadline for applying to a Fulbright scholarship, I was having some beers with friends. And I get home and my mother had seen a post about applying for a scholarship to study in the US. And she called me at 10 p.m. and said, you've got to go to Lisbon tomorrow. Get on the train in the morning, go to Lisbon. This is the last chance. And it ends at 12 p.m., right? So I was a bit kind of tipsy with the beers and all that, but hey, I slept for about 4 hours. I got on the train and then the train got delayed. So I get to the place at 12:30. The deadline was at 12. And I ring the doorbell. The lady says, it's closed. I said, I'm very sorry, the train was late. Could you open an exception? And for a couple of seconds, my life was about to change, right? And I just didn't know how until she said, all right, come in. I had no idea what I was going to write in the form. I improvised. But I didn't let go. So it's really this opportunity to say, this is what I can do. And cultivating that radar that enables you to cut through everything else.
Delivery, and on this side, take the chances and listen to your mother. There you go.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. You want me to stand up? Am I
Sure.
clear?
Yes.
I'm rather small, so I will stand up. I thank you also for your presentation. In my understanding of leadership, I actually like to tell myself that there is a real difference between someone in authority and someone who's a leader. And the way I like to demarcate that difference is with emotional intelligence. You both alluded to that, but can I hear a little bit more about your understanding of the importance of emotional intelligence and perhaps some examples from your own experiences? Thank you.
I'm going to do this quickly because Joe's nagging me the time. I think you're absolutely right. I think that the role, a lot of people will like the sound of a job, but they don't, no, they will like the sound of the role, but not the job. Okay, so, and I don't think leadership comes in the sense of the role, the title you hold. It comes from you being able to enable others. That's where it comes from. And there are very, very different ways of doing that. And I think, you know, working out how you do that, what you're good at in that sense and what you're not. There are certain things. I mean, I'm the first person to sit in this room and say, I'm impatient. I am so impatient and I have to curb it. I have to hang on to that and say, you know, that's not what I've got to listen to other people. You know, and that's just one of those things. So I think it's those sorts of things that it's about how you hear. It is about hearing, and it's also about then responding. So I think we haven't got time to go into examples. I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards, but I think it really is about how you enable others, and you can lead at any level.
Heitor, you want to say something?
Yes, I'll just add a few thoughts. But also an example which was asked. I'll give you the example straight away because we don't have much time. One thing that I always make sure I do on a first class with a new group of students is tell them very seriously that I am there to support them unconditionally. However, my support will always be directly proportional to their own investment. I tell them that I'm just as interested in their success as they are, if not more. And that evaluation is a consequence and not a condition. I think that shifts the mood of the classroom quite often. So, because we're running out of time, I hope this is a satisfying example.
Thank you, Heitor. We have time probably for one more. It's one at the back there.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. And it's really wonderful just to listen to leaders here, especially the senior academic. And that's the leadership question that I have about it. Is you've got some senior leaders who are very toxic, and being very blunt here. And then you have some who are very, very kind, and the kind ones get suppressed or repressed in some ways. And so they kind of just go down. How do we deal with that? How do we ensure that someone who's toxic in that leadership position, creating that toxicity, creating those groups of people and segregating academics actually, who are in research and teaching or in any other roles, and they're not part of the team or the toxic group, how do we handle them? And then the good people who really can make a difference, they just step back and they just become very kind of just sitting there and just doing the job. So how do we handle some academics like that?
It's a question we could spend an hour on, and we've all known it. I think the question is how you ask for questions and what's causing toxicity. Toxicity is caused by many different things and many different behaviors. Sometimes it's just personality clashes. You don't know what all of those things are. But I think that the thing is, how do you ask questions? And that doesn't matter whether you're low down in the food chain or up high in the food chain. I think bringing people into a conversation and opening that conversation up. Toxicity often happens behind closed doors, often happens in closed rooms, or unfortunately these days on WhatsApp or other forms of social or less public media. And I think there are some things you can stop very quickly. Some people call them, there's a guy in this, are you from Australia? No, it's just that there's a guy called Steve Simpson who does a lot of work on something called unwritten ground rules, UGRs. It's worth looking them up. It's what really happens around here rather than what's on the big values structure. Identifying the unwritten ground rules is one of the first things to do. And I would say you have to do that at interview long before you get into something. You can stop those things either way, but that's where you have to start.
Heitor, do you have anything to say on the toxic leadership?
Question, of course, very pertinent. My advice would be have as much diplomacy as possible. Being diplomatic is a very good defense that you have. You know, if you follow the protocol, there's less of a chance that things will go catastrophically wrong. The other recommendation that I would have is to acknowledge the complexity, as Anna was just pointing out, and create to the best of your abilities. I don't want to use the word bubble because it's got very bad connotations nowadays due to social media, but create, let's say, an environment, a micro environment where you can actually, in its own scale, find yourself in a safe place and in a place where you can still nurture, be disruptive, but also be efficient. In my experience, and I'll be very brief, but I think this is an important point. In my experience, often toxicity dissolves when you show that you're efficient. I remember a particular situation in which there was a position for head of the scientific board at our college. Nobody wanted to fulfill it. They were not so keen on electing me, but I was the weakest link. I was the only one who couldn't come up with an excuse. So I was placed there. It so happened that I drastically reduced the length of the meetings from 4 hours to 1 hour. I got reelected right away, or a couple of years later. So efficiency is also a good solvent for toxicity.
Great, thank you. And thank you, both of you, for being efficient in terms of time. We're just going to bring this to a close now. I'd like to thank you both. As with most of the panels that we have, the idea really is to scratch at the surface of something a lot larger, and then to continue the discussions as provocations over the next few days, and also for you to contribute in different ways to this project that we're doing, and so that you can take some things back, hopefully, into your lives, to your institutions, because as we said on the first day, we need help to be good leaders, from other leaders, from the people we work with, and from our staff. Thank you very much. It's 2:10 and we're on time. Thank you very much.